Hello, ladies and gentlemen of On the Line. Today, I am very excited to have as my guest Professor Avi Loeb, who is the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard University. That is quite the title, and it's very impressive, and he's a really impressive guy. You may know him better as one of the chief scientists who was arguing publicly several years ago that the interstellar object Oumuamua might actually have been an alien technological spacecraft of some kind, maybe space junk. Well, he's back in the news this week because now he's suggesting that there is another interstellar object that is going to make a pass around our sun sometime in the next few weeks. This is known as the 3I Atlas object. We get right into it. His whole theory on what is anomalous about this particular object, why it could be a comet, but why it could be something else, and basically why scientists, the entire scientific establishment, is so reluctant to consider that as a possibility or a hypothesis worth examining. So I loved this conversation with him. I hope you will too. Do check it out. And here we are again on the line. And if you haven't checked us out already, on our Substack, www.readtheline.ca.
This episode of On the Line is brought to you by Airbnb. It's no secret that Canada is in a housing crisis, something that short-term rentals such as Airbnbs are the problem. But the total amount of Airbnbs that could be converted into long-term homes accounts for only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. In reality, Airbnbs play a key role in stimulating local economies across Canada, with Airbnb guests generating an estimated $10.8 billion in visitor spending. Learn more at Airbnb.ca/closerlook.
Well, hello, Professor Loeb. So awesome to have you here. I'm so excited that you actually came to speak to little old me. I have your book in the background here. I read it a couple of years ago now. So I'm more than thrilled to see you, back in the news, and also willing to talk so openly and candidly about some of your hypotheses with the general public. So it's really wonderful to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I should just say that I once had a flood in the basement of my home, and the plumber that came along, sat on the stairs, and we had a chat for a couple of hours, and I was very happy to chat with him. I often prefer people that are not professionals because they are sincere and honest. And if you spend some time in academia, you realize that's not necessarily the case. I was hoping by becoming a scientist to maintain my childhood curiosity. And it's a great privilege, to ask questions and then answer them based on evidence. But what I find is something quite different, that academics often behave, as the adults in the room. They wish to maintain their stature, and that's why they alienate the public. And I don't see myself as any different from anyone else on the street. I'm just curious, and I have the privilege of following my curiosity. That's all.
Well, you do have some expertise and background, which I think perhaps distinguishes you a little bit from people like me. But I do want to, and I want to get into all of that because I think that I want to get into all of that discussion. But first, I want to get into just the news. And one is, of course, your name has been in the news of late because I believe you were one of the co-authors of a paper that kind of speculated about the possibility that an object called 3I/Atlas might not be natural, so to speak. And of course, this follows on the work that you had previously written about Oumuamua, which was another interstellar object that we detected several years ago that you, again, hypothesized may have an extraterrestrial intelligent or technical origin, if I'm saying that correctly.
Well, it's for a simple reason. We launched spacecraft and also space trash. We've been polluting space with technological gadgets. And, the sun is one out of 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. We know that a significant fraction of them have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. And to think that we are unique and special and nothing like us ever existed is arrogance, And in my view, we should at least put this possibility on the table that some of the objects that arrive into the solar system from outside are technological. Why rule it out in advance? That's narrow-mindedness. I call it the Stone Age of comet experts, that they expect everything in the sky to be stones, to be rocks. I'm open-minded because I know that we exist and we've done that.
So let's go back a little bit. So why is it that we are now just perceiving these objects that are coming from outside our solar system? Why are we only starting to notice that now?
So, I don't like science fiction. I never read any science fiction book. I don't like science fiction movies. I follow the science, and science is basically following the evidence, data. And only over the past decade, we started collecting data or discovering objects that came into the solar system from outside. There are 3 of them that were noticed by astronomers through telescopes. The reason we found them is because the US Congress tasked NASA to identify more than 90% of all objects bigger than a football field, 140 meters, that may collide with Earth because they may cause significant damage. We know that the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid, a rock, the size of Manhattan Island, and we are smarter than them. We can find those rocks before they hit the Earth. And that's why the Pan-STARRS survey telescope was constructed in Hawaii a decade ago. And now we have the Rubin Observatory that was just inaugurated on June 2025. And the Pan-STARRS telescope discovered a near-Earth object. And then the astronomers realized, actually, this object is moving too fast to be bound to the sun by gravity. And therefore, it's interstellar. That was Oumuamua. Mm-hmm. And initially, it was cataloged as a comet. And a comet obviously needs to have some plume of gas and dust around it, a cometary tail. That's the way it's identified, just for the same reason that the zebra should have stripes. That's the way it's defined. But there was no cometary tail, and the comet experts said, oh, well, it's a dark comet. That's what they say most recently. Mm-hmm. Actually, it has a tail of gas, but the tail is not visible. And I, maintain the view that if we don't see a tail, there is no tail. I mean, usually it's made of dust and gas, and it reflects sunlight. So I behave like the kid in Hans Christian Andersen's tale, where I say the emperor has no clothes. And the adults in the room are telling me, oh, the emperor does have clothes, you just can't see them. So that was Oumuamua, and it was also pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force. I had non-gravitational acceleration. I suggested it's just the sunlight that is bouncing off its surface and pushing it. And indeed, 3 years later, the same telescope in Hawaii, Pan-STARRS, discovered another object pushed by reflecting sunlight, ended up being a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966. On January 2nd, 2025, this year, an amateur astronomer discovered a near-Earth object, and it was cataloged as an asteroid, this one. And then it was realized, oh, actually, this one follows the trajectory of the Tesla Roadster car that was launched as a dummy payload.
Oh, right.
The Falcon Heavy by SpaceX. And so it's not a rock, it's a car.
Right.
And all I'm saying is, maybe Elon Musk was not the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago.
It's possible there are some other people out there.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, Elon, but there were stars that preceded the sun. We are late to the party, and someone else might have accomplished much more. And we, did not exit the solar system as of yet. We sent Voyager, Pioneer, we also New Horizons. But these would become space junk once they exit the outer boundary of the Oort cloud, of the solar system in about 10,000 years. Mm-hmm. And, another civilization that is more mature than us might actually have sent to interstellar space functional devices because they have ambitions that extend beyond their immediate environment. If you look at world politics, we just focus on killing each other, on conflicts regarding territorial disputes on this rock that we happen to inhabit. That is a very narrow-minded point of view. There is much more real estate out there. And someone more intelligent than us might have decided to send a spacecraft. And, if they were to behave as the solution to Enrico Fermi's question, where is everybody, which is the dark forest, if they realize that making any sound in that dark forest would endanger your survival, that in fact you just need to listen rather than transmit signals, they may be not very far from us. And when they realize that we might be a young technological civilization that is posing a potential threat to them, because we keep transmitting, we broadcast everything that happens on Earth.
Because we're really smart. We keep on going like, hey, fur.
Then we might see a visit. As much as it sounds unlikely, if there is a device that is functional, it would target the inner solar system.
Let's get into the actual specific target. But firstly, I want to make a joke about this is why we haven't seen Martians on Mars. They're just like, you idiots, shut up. No, that's just a joke. So I do want to get into 3.1/Atlas. But first, we explain just what does 3.1 Atlas means?
Yeah.
Like, what's that name mean?
So first of all, it's I, not one. So it's called 3I Atlas.
This is why you're the expert and I'm the dummy you're talking to. So there you go.
This is, it's just a name. 3 means it's the third object from interstellar space, and the I stands for interstellar. In the coming decade,
and Atlas, is that the name of the telescope that found
it's the name of the telescope that was 0.5 meter in size, a survey telescope in Chile, just next to it is the Rubin Observatory that was the successor to the Pan-STARRS survey telescope. It was funded by the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy in the US, and it was inaugurated in June 2025, this year, just around the time when this 3I Atlas object was discoverable. And it's amazing that a tiny telescope discovered it first, and then the Rubin telescope team realized that if they go back and look at their data, they could have discovered it before. But in the coming decade, they will discover an interstellar object that's based on estimates every few months. So even though we have only 3, the number will grow very rapidly. And my point is, we are very concerned about existential risks from artificial intelligence, from climate change, from an asteroid impact. We should also add to the list the possibility of alien tech. And, there was just a warning about a tsunami that could affect Hawaii. That's the best the government can do with a natural disaster of that magnitude. Think about a technological object from interstellar space as a tsunami of an astronomical magnitude, because we don't know in advance what their intent is. And if they have technologies far more advanced than we possess, it may feel like the Iranian air defense system when the B-2 bombers showed overhead.
So let's get into the specific space object and what about it you find anomalous. I mean, in your writing, you talk a little bit about what is slightly off about this interstellar object. Now, obviously, we don't have a huge catalog of 1,000 interstellar objects that we can compare it to, so we don't really know what the baseline for normal is.
Exactly.
That being said, there are some things about this object that have your eyebrows up, and I think they're really interesting anomalies. So I was wondering if you can give us a brief overview of what those are.
Yeah, I usually wake up early in the morning for my morning jog of about 3 miles at sunrise. That morning, I had to wake up at 2 a.m. because I was interviewed on the radio, coast to coast. And one of the listeners emailed me and said, well, there is just a new object that was announced. That allowed me to follow it from the beginning. And as soon as I heard about it, I calculated the expected size of a solid object that reflects as much sunlight as this one. And I realized that it has to be 20 kilometers in diameter. That's bigger than Manhattan Island, twice as large as the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. It's a giant thing. Oumuamua was of order 100 meters. So, it's about 200 times smaller. Mm-hmm. And so for every object like Oumuamua, we should have very few objects that are 20 kilometers. In fact, we should have discovered 1 million Oumuamuas before discovering this one if they were both rocks.
So this is a question I had from your writing. Is what's unusual about this the size in and of itself, or is what's unusual about this the fact that the probability of seeing something this large before seeing a bunch of littler, smaller interstellar objects is really low? So is it the size that in and of itself that's unusual, or is it just the probability?
No, there are objects that are big, but they are very rare. So it's the fact that we haven't seen many small ones. And moreover, I did a calculation on, my wife wanted to go on vacation on the 4th of July, but I had to write it up. So she enjoyed the beach without me. My point was that there is not enough rocky material in interstellar space to account for the discovery of a 20-kilometer size rock every few years, because this survey was operating for a few years. You can't deliver so much mass as a 20-kilometer rock every few years from interstellar space. There is just not enough of it. And so I concluded in my paper, just to be as conservative as possible, I said, well, maybe the actual size of the solid object is less than 1 kilometer. Then it's fine in terms of it being comparable in dimensions to Oumuamua and also not carrying too much rocky material. But then the reflection of sunlight must be associated with a cloud of dust around it that reflects sunlight, which is possible if it's a comet. So if it is a comet with a small nucleus, everything is fine in terms of the mass budget, in terms of the actual object being much smaller than we infer from the reflection of sunlight. But that was not the reason I suggested it might be technological in origin, because it could have been a comet, then a case closed. The reason I suggested it might be technological is because of its trajectory that is very unusual. It arrives in the orbital plane of the planets around the sun to within 5 degrees. And the chance of that happening is 0.1%, 0.2% for such an orientation. Moreover, it is arriving at the right time to the inner solar system. So in other words, if you take that trajectory and randomly select the arrival time of the object, only in 1 out of 20,000 cases, you will end up getting as close as this object will to Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. So it's extremely well designed to come very close to all these inner planets. And then it arrives closest to the sun when the Earth is on the opposite side. We won't be able to see it. And that's exactly the time when it can do a maneuver. If it were a technological object, it's called an Oberth maneuver, meaning we use this maneuver with spacecraft in order to launch them at a high speed to accelerate them, but you can also slow them down if you give the thrust from the engine of the rocket in the opposite direction. And so if this object wanted to remain bound to the sun, it will do it at closest approach, perihelion. And at that point, we won't be able to see it. So my point is, if it doesn't show up on the other side of the sun as expected, the stock market may crash. And there was a fan of my writings that texted me and said he is now investing, trading options against the volatility of the stock market that will expire on October 29th, 2025, when this object will come closest to the sun.
Well, and I think we have to be careful here because when the way that you phrase the paper, you're very cautious in saying we're engaging in a hypothetical. We're engaging in a what-if scenario. You don't have absolute proof that this thing is technological because nobody can possibly have proof that this thing is technological.
I'll tell you a secret. The reason I'm doing it is in order to encourage my colleagues, observers, to collect as much data as possible. Because think about the historical case of Galileo Galilei, where the church, the Vatican, put him in house arrest. If they were to be taking the scientific approach, they would say, let's look through our telescopes for as much data as possible to prove him wrong. And then they would have figured out that he's right. Now,
well, let's not hold that thought, because it's very possible they could put you in house arrest if this particular object does not make its way around back around the sun.
No, but so, wait, let me finish the story. Then in 1992, the Vatican admitted that Galileo was right, but that was 350 years after he died. So, but I just wanted to finish the peculiarities about this trajectory. The object also moves in the opposite direction to the motion of the Earth around the Sun. So it will move at about 98 kilometers per second relative to Earth when it's coming close to us. That's 3 times the maximum speed that our rockets can achieve. There is no way for us to launch something from Earth and intercept it. But yesterday, I actually submitted a new paper for publication. I had this idea that, in fact, there is a spacecraft that is in orbit around Jupiter. It's called Juno. Juno was the wife of Jupiter in Roman mythology. So this spacecraft is called Juno, and it was launched in 2011, a long time ago. And it was planned to be sent into Jupiter in September 2025 because as the end of the mission. That was their plan. And I realized with my colleagues, Adam Hibberd and Adam Crowell, that in fact, if we give it a nudge, if NASA decides to fire the engine instead of driving it into Jupiter for it to die there, instead of that, driving it away from Jupiter and giving it a kick of 2.6 kilometers per second, then if that happens on September 9th, 2025, then on March 14, 2026, when this object, 3I Atlas, comes closest to Jupiter, this Juno spacecraft will intercept it.
No, but that would be after it's already gone through perihelion. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so if this is in fact a technical object, we're already getting invaded by the time we,
right. But this
Juno.
Would be a way of diagnosing. I mean, if it happens to be a comet, learning much more about it, because a flyby can inform us much more than telescopes on Earth. And if I had a terminal disease, if I knew that I have a limited time for my life, and I would spend it riding Juno in a collision course with an interstellar object, irrespective of whether it's natural or artificial. It must be a magnificent view as you get close to it. It's spent billions of years traveling through space,
That's crazy and glorious, and I love it for you. So I want to wear two hats here. I want to wear one hat that is let's have fun with this hypothetical hat. And then I'm going to put on the cynical journalist hat for a second here. My let's have fun hypothetical hat is, and I want to reiterate sort of your observations here just to make sure everybody understands them. One of the things that is highly anomalous about this particular object, in addition to the size, is the fact that it has a really unique trajectory that if you were planning some kind of probe into a probe on Earth, this is exactly the kind of trajectory that you would hypothetically want to plot in order to maximize your exposure to the inner solar system and Earth without anybody on Earth presumably being able to detect you or see you. And the reason why that is the case is because this thing is going to, like any other comet, is going to come into the solar system, hit the sun, and then the point at which it's closest to the sun, so the point at which it turns around, at that point, it's going to be on the far side of the sun from where we are. So we're going to have no way of seeing what the hell is happening or what's going on. So if this thing tries to, for example, stop, slow down, lock its orbit into the sun opposite Earth.
Or send mini probes towards Earth.
Or send mini probes, something like that. Yeah. We're blind. We can't do it. So let's just play with the crazy hypothetical.
But one more thing that I didn't have a chance to say is that it originates from a direction, a special direction, which is the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which is crowded with stars. And that makes it very difficult for us to detect it. And that's why it was discovered only in July 2025, when it's too late for us to launch something to intercept it from Earth. So if you were to hide yourself as one of these stars, at a large distance, it wasn't really moving much across the sky, and it was confused for a star.
Right. Now, I don't want to get into the cynical hat just yet, but wouldn't an object like this have to have been traveling for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years before it gets to our solar system?
Well, outside the solar system, maybe even billions of years. The Voyager spacecraft will take about 1 billion years to travel from the solar system to the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy. Well, but the time it took it to travel from the edge of the solar system at 100,000 times the Earth-Sun separation to where we are is about 8,000 years.
So
the duration of the time that humans recorded their history, 8,000 years.
So we're not talking about somebody who just, got wind of us 3 months ago and decided to send a probe in.
Oh, it depends how far the original base was, So you can imagine probes being parked either in the outskirts of the solar system or somewhere within the solar system. We wouldn't notice them because they are far away. If they are 1,000 times the Earth-Sun separation, our telescopes cannot detect objects they don't reflect much sunlight. And from there, it would take less than 80 years, to reach us.
So if there were sort of pre-existing probes, or I presume if we were talking about something hypothetically that had wormhole technology, for example.
Oh, no, I'm not speculating on that because we simply don't have any clue that the physics, the fundamental physics allows wormholes to exist. Wormholes can be constructed if you have exotic material with a negative mass. Mm-hmm. And as of now, we just don't understand how you can make an object with a negative mass. Moreover, negative mass will create a lot of problems in fundamental physics. There will be time machines. There would be contradictions. I'm actually right now working on a paper that attempts to figure out if it's possible to rule out negative masses. I know for a fact that no Jewish physicist had access to a time machine in our future, because if I were...
It doesn't rule out the possibility of the bad physicists, though.
No, because if I had access to a time machine, I would go back before the Second World War and kill Hitler.
You would kill baby Hitler.
Because 65 members of my father's family were killed in the Holocaust. And since this didn't happen, it's clear that I don't have access to a time machine, and the same must be true for any Jewish physicist in the future.
That doesn't mean but there could be some future physicist could be a bad person, could be one of the bad people.
Right.
So I want to get back into my fun hypothetical space. So, I mean, we're not talking about an object that was sent toward Earth in our lifetime. Probably not, right? Because this thing would have had to have been traveling for a very long time.
Oh, yeah. I don't think if it's technological and was the trajectory was designed a long time ago before we existed, they don't have us in mind. They are visiting the inner solar system for a completely different reason. It's just like a person walking, on the street, and then there might be ants in the cracks of the pavement, and that person might step on them, but the goal of that person has nothing to do with the ants.
Right.
So,
right.
so
okay.
this
could probably just rocks, could be space junk from another civilization, probably not, but maybe a probe. That would be kind of the order of probability here.
No, I would say space junk has a low probability, because if you're not targeting the inner part of a planetary system like the solar system, the chance of a random object passing by is really small. You need about 10 times the mass of the Earth per star in technological junk. So imagine 10 planets like the Earth converted entirely into technological junk. That's what's necessary in order to see an object like Oumuamua or an object like 3I Atlas as technological space trash. Okay.
This is either a highly coincidental comet or some kind of probe.
Exactly.
Okay. So here's the question: is that in a hypothetical scenario where this is some kind of probe, we have a scenario where obviously we're not dealing with, for example, trans-dimensional beings. We're dealing with material beings that still have to operate within the boundaries of physics as we know it.
Exactly. That's the way I think. And, within the mainstream of physics right now, this would amuse you, but over the past 40 years, the mainstream of theoretical physics was focused on extra dimensions. This is something that we've never seen. We know that we live in 3 dimensions plus time. And, there is a huge literature by now on extraspatial dimensions. And you might say, well, that's an interesting possibility, but it's definitely speculative. And I find it far more speculative than the possibility that something like us existed for billions of years before we came to exist and produced technological debris in space. To me, it sounds like this should be part of the mainstream.
So it seems, but it's a bit of a reassuring thing, because, well, if this is a probe, and I still think that's not the highest probability, but if this is a probe, it's still, we're not dealing with something that's so technologically advanced that we can't conceptualize it. It's something that still has to rely on, say, the Oberth maneuver, still has to maneuver a trajectory, can't move at, say, for example, the speed of thought, can't open a wormhole between dimensions, can't do any of that crazy stuff.
Right.
It's still fundamentally operating in the same physical universe as we
exactly.
are.
And people often think, to travel between stars, you really need to exceed the speed of light. No, that's wrong. As I said, Voyager, within 1 billion years, which is 10% of the age of the Milky Way galaxy, would move to the opposite side. So in fact, even our rockets can bridge the gap among all stars in the Milky Way galaxy, at a speed that we produced already. That is, 1 part in 10,000 of the speed of light, very slow. And you don't need to reach the speed of light. Now, of course, they might have propulsion technologies that exceed those that we use. They might have technologies within the object, but those, I assume, are consistent with the laws of physics as we know them.
Right.
And there could also be materials that we are not aware of, because most of the matter in the universe is invisible to us. We call it dark matter. So you could imagine stealth objects that are completely invisible to us. I wrote a recent paper, actually just last week, that suggests to observe such objects with gravitational wave detectors, because they will produce a gravitational signal no matter what. You can't avoid that. Any mass does that. So even if there are stealth objects that we haven't discovered yet from interstellar space, once we build the next generation of gravitational wave detectors, we'll detect their gravitational signal. That's what's shown in that paper.
But the fact that we can see this particular object, even if it is disguised, willfully or otherwise, also tells us something. That means that we're dealing with something that does not have stealth technology.
Definitely.
It has to try and be deceptive as a result of it. So, this is kind of interesting.
The simplest interpretation would be to say it's a comet. And of course, in that case, as it comes closer to the sun, it will be more and more visible as a comet. There should be a tail, there should be a plume of gas and dust that is very clear around it, and because it will get warmer as it gets closer to the sun. So my point is simple. If future data in the next month or two show a cometary tail beyond any reasonable doubt that is composed of the kind of molecules and atoms that we see in cometary tails, then it's natural. That was not the case for Oumuamua. And that's why I started saying maybe it's technological. And, given that we have space trash that behaves like Oumuamua.
So here's where I would take off the, fun hypothetical hat. And here's where I'm going to put on the really cynical journalist hat. And that is, I'm going to note, look, the public, myself included, really interested in aliens. And I think that the public has a tendency to get quite indifferent or skeptical toward investment in science and investment in this kind of technology. When it's like, well, we're just staring at the stars for what? What are we getting out of this? But you start talking about the possibility of aliens and even, hey, maybe we need to defend ourselves from aliens. And all of a sudden, you got 12 million hits on Joe Rogan. You got me talking to you. You're on CNN. You're on all these places. So, do you have a vested interest in proposing the possibility that this is technological or alien in origin? Because you know that that is going to generate interest in funding projects like changing Juno's trajectory, and funding projects like more telescopes, funding projects that eventually get us more scientific funding toward making new discoveries and advancements.
No, I really think that the public may be right here, and that academia is misguided out of arrogance. Very often, funding committees argue we should not take that risk. We should not consider technological signatures. Let's just search for microbes. And they say we don't want to waste taxpayers' money. My point is that we should ask the taxpayers what they want their money to be spent on. And maybe they have their intuition right. I mean, why is it heresy to imagine intelligence out there? And, searching for microbes. First of all, I don't find microbes very exciting. I find them boring because I can't learn a lot from imitating them. I would rather see a smarter kid on our cosmic blog that I can learn from. But moreover, the signatures of intelligence could be ubiquitous. I mean, if we find a gadget, it might be beyond any reasonable doubt. Whereas if we find oxygen and methane in the atmosphere of an exoplanet for the price tag of more than $10 billion, which is assigned to the Habitable World Observatory right now by the mainstream of astronomy as the highest priority, that still will not be conclusive, because you can get these molecules out of geological processes on the planet. It would be quite difficult to prove the point that there are microbes. It would be likely, but not demonstrated. Of course, we might find microbes on Mars or elsewhere in the solar system. That's a different matter. But I think that we should hedge our bets and invest similar funds, billions of dollars in the search for aliens. First, because the public cares about it. Second, because the signatures might be clearer. And since we are not doing it, it remains an extraordinary claim. I don't think it's extraordinary. I think it's an ordinary claim that we should examine as part of the mainstream. Now, about my motivation, I will give you just two anecdotes. First, over the past month, the month of July 2025, I wrote 9 new scientific papers that are posted on the archive, submitted for publication in peer-reviewed journal. 9 in 1 month. Okay, that's not unusual. And moreover, I wrote 20 essays on medium.com that convey the research to the public, because I feel
your output is better than mine, which I'm a little bit ashamed of.
But my point is I give my highest priority to the scientific work that I'm doing, not to the publicity, not to gaining attention. It's the scientific papers that make the point, and then I talk about what is in there. Now, the other anecdote I should say is that, there is a Netflix documentary being prepared about my research. They keep following me everywhere. And at some point, they had an interview just a few months ago in my office. They asked me, Avi, are you doing all of that just to get the Nobel Prize if you find extraterrestrial intelligence?
Yeah, long shot play.
And I said, no, because... if I do discover extraterrestrial intelligence, I would not waste my time going to Stockholm. This is a prize that was given by humans to humans for many years. And why would I spend time there? I would much rather spend my time learning from our cosmic neighbors. And, I would follow the act of Bob Dylan. Just forget about it. It's not important. Really, let's just recap here. If we do find extraterrestrial intelligence, it will change the future of humanity. It's the biggest question that science can address. It's the most romantic question in science. Do we have a partner out there? And when you go on a blind date, here on Earth, you can assume that whoever you date has the same structure of DNA as you do. But when you date someone from another star, all bets are off. So it's a bit risky, instead of a serial killer here on Earth, which you might say is very dangerous, but still we can cope with that. I'm not sure we can cope with a civilization that had more than a century of science after they discovered quantum mechanics. We just had 1 century, and they may have had, thousands, millions, or even billions of years. And we can learn from them. There are lots of things we don't understand. as long as they allow us to do that. But we should definitely be aware of the possibility that we are not the smartest kid on the block. And why would we, diminish the possibility that we are not alone? Why should we argue that we should search only for microbes, spend more than $10 billion without spending any federal funding on the search for aliens? That's what I find completely out of proportion, completely out of resonance with public's interest. And since I don't regard myself as different from the public, I'm willing, to put my body on the barbed wire. It's actually, it would have been much more convenient for me to, follow the narrative of the herd. And obviously the herders would like to keep the herd in a tight configuration and ridicule anyone that deviates from the beaten path. I see that as a big, they're inflicting a large damage to innovation in science, because not because of me being hesitant as a result. I know how to survive, but it's the young people who see that behavior and they're worried about their job prospects. And as a result, they don't innovate, they don't deviate from the beaten path. And as a result, science progresses very slowly. So, if we declare that everything in the sky is comets or asteroids, then we will interpret anything we find like a dark comet or a dark asteroid. We will always find an excuse not to discover life out there just because we say it's an extraordinary claim.
Your capacity to see is fundamentally clouded by the ideological lens that you are approaching.
Right.
I want to come back to this idea because I want to talk about some of your frustrations with academia and with the scientific establishment. But first, I have to say, like and subscribe and check us out at www.readtheline if you haven't already.
This episode is also brought to you by the Métis Nation of Ontario. It's Sault Ste. Marie in 1820. In the early 1800s, on the St. Mary's River, Métis traders moved fur, fish, and goods through the water highways of the upper Great Lakes. Before Confederation, there was a country being built with supplies brought one canoe at a time. Today, Métis governments, like the Métis Nation of Ontario, are building again. Canada is investing billions to strengthen the economy against tariffs. To last, this next economy must include the people who built the first one. The MNO is calling on Prime Minister Mark Carney to work with Métis governments to improve consultation and partnerships on major projects and expand investments in Métis businesses and communities. The Métis were here at the beginning, building this great country, and they're still here, ready to build again. Learn more at OntarioMétisFacts.com.
Okay, Professor Loeb, one thing that I have noticed when I was reading over some of the work that you've been doing in recent years, and I think that this is a recurring theme back from when your book on Oumuamua was first published, I sense a lot of frustration with your peers and your colleagues in academia, and I sense a lot of frustration with the kind of dogmatism of, for lack of a better term, the scientific establishment, and why that really interests me above and beyond aliens and spaceships, because yeah, fun. But why that interests me is that very much dovetails with a lot of my own work about long-term decline in institutional trust. And there was one quote in one of your writings, and I'm going to quote it right back to you here, and I'm going to pull it up if you give me just 1 second. And that is, you said something to the effect of, scientific advances are routinely communicated in press conferences where scientists speak to reporters like teachers in a classroom, encouraging questions but resisting debates. Holy shoot, did that ever speak to me as a reporter? Because I think it's exactly right. I think that a lot of these institutional authorities are getting more and more, for lack of a better term, condescending in their tone and approach as they feel their own internal credibility slipping away. And the tone gets more patronizing and more condescending and more painful to listen to. And rather than bringing people in line, it's had the opposite effect. It's actually pushing people away. And I think it's an endemic problem that our society is dealing with at every level, from scientific establishment to academia to public health to journalism. And I'll be honest, I've caught myself doing this too. I occasionally have started to lecture my audience about nonsense that I see coming up in my comments section, and I've made this mistake as well. So I'm not innocent of it.
I should say, well, first of all, I was part of the establishment. I chaired the astronomy department at Harvard for 9 years. I chaired the board on physics and astronomy of the National Academies. I just am not willing to surrender to peer pressure, to abandon my childhood curiosity. I'm not giving up on the dream that I have as a scientist to be open-minded and pay attention to anomalies, because that's the only way by which we can learn something new. And what bothers me is that the mainstream very often not only raises obstacles and tries to ignore and shove things under the carpet, all the anomalies under the carpet of traditional thinking, but it gets personal, and especially with social media, I get attacked on, nonsense. I have nothing to do with the argument. And what happens is a cycle where some journalists make grandiose claims that I've never mentioned. They don't even speak to me. I mean, in the recent interest on 3i Atlas, most of the reports in the media were not a result of communicating with me. And all you need to do is read the papers that I write, the essays on medium.com. I have 60,000 followers. You just read those essays, read my papers, and that's what I think. And that's the way I speak in podcasts. As much as I can, I explain myself. But these reporters just want to have sensational themes to their report, so they report incorrectly. And then people start attacking me on what the reporter said and claim that I said that. And they they attack me personally. But what bothers me the most about the mainstream is that, if the mainstream was always right, then I would say, okay, well, they can get the privilege of telling us what's right because they got it right. But I look at my own experience where, there is a puzzle. What is most of the matter in the universe? We call it dark matter. We don't know what it is. And the most popular view was that it's weakly interacting massive particles, supersymmetric particles. And for 40 years, since I started practicing astrophysics, that was the claim. And billions of dollars were spent on experiments trying to detect weakly interacting massive particles. People got honors, awards, get recognition. They were celebrated. And then we didn't find anything. Okay, we didn't find we now have very tight limits. We didn't find supersymmetry with a Large Hadron Collider. Instead, theoretical physics went in directions that cannot be falsified. Ideas like the multiverse that we have no way of falsifying. Ideas like extra dimensions in the context of string theory. String theory doesn't make predictions. I once asked a string theorist, if we do an experiment and find your conjecture to be wrong, would you agree that string theory is disproven? He said, no, it would just mean that my conjecture is wrong. String theory will always be right. And this is a signature.
So it's an unfalsified, and so we based our entire physics around an unfalsifiable idea.
Yeah, I ask, what's the difference between that and a religious cult? There is no difference if you are not subjecting your ideas to experimental tests. And, you're no different. And as a result, I say, well, if the practice of the mainstream in some fields of physics and astrophysics is like that, and I pay attention to anomalies of something real, there is an object like Oumuamua. It showed things that are not typical of asteroids or comets in the solar system. If I discuss it and say, let's leave on the table one possibility, why is that considered heresy that is so bad that I should be attacked personally for that? I find that ridiculous. That's exactly the approach of science, to ask questions and then collect as much data as possible to answer them. And we should allow for the possibility of space trash that is technological, because we produced it. We know that it exists out there. And, when there was a paper just half a year ago claiming that there are 14 dark comets in the solar system, I went after that and looked with a colleague at these objects, and most of them are actually spacecraft that were launched since Sputnik, by either the Soviet Union or the United States. So here again, calling them dark comets is like saying it's a zebra without stripes. Like, it's a comet. Let's assume it's a comet. It's just that we don't see the cometary tail. And, that's an oxymoron. And the fact that the mainstream of comet experts would say that to me, is a deviation from scientific practice. They should call it an unexplained object that has non-gravitational acceleration. We don't understand it, and just catalog it as that. Calling it a comet is a cheat. And so what I see is a cheat on the side of experts. And obviously, we've seen that quite often during the COVID-19 pandemic. For one thing, people who suggested that maybe the virus came from the Wuhan lab because it did gain of function experiments on SARS viruses. That's a completely legitimate possibility to consider. I mean, if it started there, then it could be that. But those people were canceled, and now it's becoming more the official explanation. So I think the problem right now with science is that it's very much embedded in echo chambers, in groupthink, and people just want to get as many likes as possible. They do virtue signaling, basically repeating the mantras. And that's true especially of people who popularize science. I will not mention names, but many of them quite famous. They just look where the wind is blowing and keep repeating the mantras of the mainstream. And they do that because they are not practicing science. Many of those popularizers of science did not write a scientific paper in the last decade or two. Just check their record. Did you write a scientific paper? No, they didn't. I wrote 9 papers in 1 month, this month. I'm in the trenches of doing science, and I'm being attacked for doing science.
Professor Loeb, I have a question to ask you, but do you feel, especially since your book on Oumuamua was published, do you feel betrayed?
No, because, when you are in love with something beautiful, you're never betrayed. It's just that when other people dismiss the beauty of what you're after, you just think of them as not very intelligent, and one reason I'm seeking a higher intelligence in interstellar space is because I don't often find it in academia.
Oh, burn! Oh, mean. I'm obviously not, in academia or an astrophysicist, but
the experience is like going to a party where you see everyone behaving in ways that you don't approve. And then you just look through the window. Maybe a new party comer will save the situation. I really think of the path that we are taking, not just in academia, but humanity as a whole, as not very productive. We engage in conflicts. We are not working cooperatively. We are not curious. We are not honest. And I think we might need a better role model than we currently have from outer space. And it's sort of like a messianic era that once we see someone doing much better than we do, we would realize that we can also do better and that we are all in the same boat. And why should we kick the boat in ways that may cause it to sink? It makes no sense whatsoever. Yet we spend $2.4 trillion every year on military budgets. So I do think we need that wake-up call from outer space. I had a group of religious scholars that came to visit me at Harvard, and they asked, will it shake our religious belief if we find extraterrestrials? And I said to them, look, I have 2 daughters. When the second one was born, it didn't take away any of my love to the first one. So assuming that God can attend to only one civilization, us, is very demeaning. It's like telling a parent, you can't have more than one child.
What do you think that many of these institutions need to do to get back into the mindset of curiosity? And how do they rebuild trust with the public with whom they are increasingly detached?
It's very simple. First, revise priorities. The priority is not to show that you're smart. The priority is to figure out the reality that we live in. And that's not the same, because you can have a beautiful idea that just doesn't work. And the way to figure it out is by collecting data and evidence and being open-minded and willing to learn. A sense of modesty, not assuming you know the answer in advance. And I think we need an alignment of the priorities of science to be in line with societal priorities. So we should ask the public, what do you care about? And what kind of questions would be of great benefit to you, the public, and address them why should it be the other way around, where the academia tells the public this is what we want to do just to prove to each other that we are smart? That's not a very sensible approach in my mind. And then so aligning priorities with the public, attending also to technological developments. Nowadays we have AI. So if you look at the humanities, the courses being taught in philosophy departments, they are often dealing with philosophers of the past, the ancient Greeks. I agree, they were quite smart, but they didn't have computers. I think there are lots of ethical questions about AI and society. So instead of humanities of the past, we should have humanities of the future. I think that's really important. And that's part of the alignment that I'm talking about. And then on funding committees, we should have innovators, people who are willing to take risks. That's the approach taken, that was taken by Bell Labs, that is being taken by, for example, Google, where, DeepMind got the Nobel Prize this year, just because they're willing to explore, to take risky directions that may not work out, but and that's supposed to be the approach that academia takes. So I'm in favor of allocating a fraction of the funding to risky propositions, just because they may open up the door. Now, many of them may fail, but if one is successful, it will pay for all the others. And, this is not the strategy right now.
The problem that I have is that humans don't think like you. Humans are fundamentally herd animals. And I'm not sure that we can get rid of that instinct.
We need good leadership in science. And so, very often, if you look at kids, they imitate older people. And so I think if more people would behave like me, the younger generation will imitate us, and the culture of academia could change. And also, one can give a good example by leadership. I have a lot of young people who are writing to me. They want to collaborate, cooperate. They still realize that I'm in a minority. But if I manage to change the culture by showing some leadership, that would be my important contribution to the future.
What happens if you're proved to be right and then you become the establishment again? Are you going to how do you prevent the same kinds of structures and rigidity from forming if you prove to be correct?
I was asked on a podcast, how do you want to be remembered? And I replied, by my future work. And that will always be true for me. I always look for new frontiers, new excitement. I will never rest on my laurels.
Cool. Well, I've loved speaking with you. I know we're reaching the end of our time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And just to put the cherry on the cake, the thing we should be watching for is if 3I Atlas doesn't make it back around the sun. Do we have a date yet when we will know for sure when the rock makes it over? Do we know for sure exactly when that will happen, when perihelion will happen?
Yeah, so in that case, first I wanted to recommend, if you have a plan for an annual vacation, take it before October 29th.
Before October 29th. Okay, yeah. Make sure maybe pull the funds out of the investment portfolio before October 29th. Not that we're giving you financial advice, but...
Well, although even in late August or September, we should know if it's a comet. And if it's a comet, then don't worry too much about it. But at any event, we will know for sure after the end of October whether it's continuing along the path that we anticipated. And I very much hope that NASA will pay attention to my new paper, that they will use Juno to get close to 3I Atlas. And if not, I will be waiting for the next encounter. When your first blind date is not successful, you just have more of the same. And
unfortunately, there's never going to be any shortage of cool stuff in the universe to go take a look at. So it'll be lots of fun.
Exactly. And by the way, we can also check if they have microbes or if they have the building blocks of life near another star. That's a completely new approach to studying what happens near other stars. It's not by using our telescopes and remote observing. We can land on such if it's a rock, we can land on it and check what it's made of.
Awesome. Well, loving the science, loving talking to you, Professor Loeb. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And again, if you haven't checked it out already, do check us out, www.readtheline.ca. On the line, we try to have really amazing new guests every week. So I hope that you've enjoyed listening to us chat.